You know what your problem is, Adrian? Lumi's voice carried across the rain-slicked pavement, cutting through the distant hum of a city that never quite sleeps. Your tie clip is crooked. Just like your intelligence, always just a little bit off. The words hung in the air between them, suspended in the golden glow of the street lamp that pulled around her like a stage light. Adrian Pierce stood 10 feet away, his silhouette sharp against the neon wash of a Chinatown bar sign flickering its last breaths into the damp night. He had followed her out of the Dawn Club with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, who had never been wrong, who had never met a woman who could see through him like cellophane. Until now. His hand went to his tie clip automatically, a betrayer's instinct, and his fingers found it perfectly straight. The slight clench of his jaw told her she'd hit something deeper. The real target. She watched the calculation flicker behind his eyes, the realization that this wasn't going according to plan. He orchestrated the scene inside perfectly, the intimate lean toward her ear, the way his fingers had brushed her arm in full view of every gossip-hungry reporter in the room. A photo that could be cropped and captioned to imply anything. A weapon forged from ambiguity. But Lumi hadn't flinched. She'd smiled that smile, the one she'd perfected over years of navigating boardrooms where men still mistook competence for luck and resilience for charm. She'd told him about his tie clip. And she'd watched something shift in his expression. Not defeat. Something more interesting. Curiosity. Beautiful night for a walk, she said now, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Her camel-colored trench coat was damp at the edges, the collar turned up against the persistent mist that passed for weather in San Francisco. Or did you need something, Adrian? The night's still young, but I have a deadline I'm not planning to miss. He moved closer, and the street lamp caught his face properly for the first time. 32, maybe 33. The kind of handsome that came from good genes and better money, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, eyes the color of rain in autumn. But there was something else there too, underneath the polished surface. Something hungry. I came to offer you a way out, he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter. More dangerous. The photo from tonight, it exists. I have it. And I have a contact at the Chronicle who owes me a favor. Ah. Lumi nodded slowly, as if considering a wine list. The I can ruin you gambit. Very original. I'm almost impressed you're being so direct about it. You think I'm bluffing? I think, she said, taking a single step toward him, close enough now that she could smell the cedar and bergamot of his cologne, could see the faint shadow of stubble he hadn't quite managed to eliminate, that if you had that photo, you'd have already used it. But you didn't, because you realized something. She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him fill it with his own anxiety. I realized, he said slowly, that you knew something about my proposal. About the 7th page. The memory of the dinner flashed through Lumi's mind, the private dining room at the Dawn Club, the clink of crystal, the careful choreography of a room full of people pretending they weren't at war. Adrian had approached her table with that carefully calibrated stride, had leaned in with that whisper meant to be witnessed, and she had smelled something off. Not his cologne. Something in the energy of the room, in the way the reporters had positioned themselves at the exact angle to capture a compromising frame. She'd seen the setup coming the way some people see a wave building before it breaks. And in that moment, she'd let herself look at him. Really look. At the slight tension in his shoulders that spoke of a long day. At the way he'd lingered by the window before approaching her, staring out at the city like he was looking for something he'd lost. At the tiredness that flickered behind his eyes despite the practiced confidence. You're afraid, she'd said to him then, low enough that no one else could hear. And that's why you need cheap tricks. His eyes had widened, just a fraction, just enough, and in that widening she'd seen the real story. The pressure from his board. The mistake someone else had made on his proposal that he was covering for. The fear that this project, this company, this meticulously constructed life might be slipping through his fingers. She'd seen it because she always saw it. That was her gift, and her curse. The ability to read the lines between the words, to hear the silences in the sentences. To understand that men like Adrian, driven, brilliant, utterly convinced of their own invincibility, were often the most fragile creatures of all. "I'm not afraid," he'd said, but his voice had cracked on the word, and they'd both heard it. She'd smiled and touched his arm, a gesture of comfort that looked like flirtation to the watching cameras, and said, "Then it's a good thing nobody's going to publish that photo." She'd walked away, and she'd been right. And now here he was, following her into the rain like a moth tracking a flame, trying to understand how she'd done it. "How did you know?" he asked now, standing too close on the wet pavement. "About the 7th page?" Lumi tilted her head, studying him. Rain had gathered in his hair, tiny diamonds catching the light. He looked younger like this, less like the CEO of Novosphere and more like the man she'd glimpsed through the window earlier, staring at the city with something like longing. "I read," she said simply. "The way you do, I imagine. But I read different things." "Different things?" "I read pauses," she said. "I read the questions nobody asks. The details nobody mentions." She took a breath, and the air tasted like salt and asphalt and the city's endless ambition. "Your proposal was beautiful, Adrian. Elegant. The kind of thing that wins prizes and gets you on magazine covers. But it had a flaw, and you knew it, and you spent 47 minutes before your presentation staring at that specific page in your hotel room, trying to convince yourself nobody would notice." His face went very still. "How could you? I had the room next door." She smiled, and there was no cruelty in it. Just truth. "I saw you through the window. You have a very expressive face when you think nobody's watching. You run your fingers through your hair when you're anxious. You tap your left ring finger against the table when you're counting down to something inevitable." Adrian stared at her like she'd just recited his credit card number and his mother's maiden name and the name of his first dog, all in one breath. "Jesus," he said quietly. "You're terrifying." "Thank you." She meant it. Most people don't mean that as a compliment, but I've learned to take it as one. The city hummed around them, a cable car bell in the distance, the laughter of tourists stumbling out of a bar, the whisper of tires on wet asphalt. Lumi felt the familiar pull of the night, that magnetic tug towards something she couldn't quite name. She'd spent her whole life being exactly where she was needed, exactly when she was needed. It wasn't a conscious choice anymore. It was just what she did. "You know what I think?" she said, and Adrian's eyes snapped back to hers with an almost desperate attention. "I think you didn't want to use that photo. I think you wanted to see if I'd fold. And when I didn't, you started to wonder." She stepped closer, close enough that she could have touched him. Close enough that she could hear his breath catch slightly, feel the heat radiating off his body in the cold night air. "If maybe you'd found something more interesting than a scapegoat." Adrian's throat worked as he swallowed. "You don't know what I'm looking for." "Don't I?" She studied his face, cataloging every micro-expression. The slight dilation of his pupils. The way his lips parted, just barely, like he was about to say something he'd been holding back for years. The tension in his shoulders that wasn't just anxiety anymore, it was something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "You're looking for someone who can see you, Adrian. Not the CEO. Not the opponent. You. The man who stares at city lights and wonders if this is all there is." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through the night. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "How long?" He asked finally, and his voice had roughened around the edges. How long have you been able to see people like that? Lumi thought about it. About the long nights in her tiny apartment, watching the fog roll in through her window. About the years she'd spent learning to read the spaces between words, to understand what men were really saying when they said nothing at all. About the stories she'd collected like treasures, the exhausted father in the airport who just needed someone to tell him he was doing okay, the brilliant engineer who'd forgotten how to be anything but brilliant, the grieving widower who just wanted to remember how to laugh. I was born this way, she said. But I didn't learn to trust it until I had to. And now? She smiled, and something in it was softer than she'd intended. Now I know that the people who need the most help are often the ones who are best at pretending they don't need any at all. Adrian laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle even him. That's a very diplomatic way of calling me desperate. I would never, Lumi said, and her tone was light but her eyes were serious, call a man in your position desperate. I'd call him strategic. With excellent instincts. He just hasn't learned to trust his own instincts yet. Another silence stretched between them, but this one was different. Softer. Almost comfortable. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he silenced it without looking. Do you have any idea, he said slowly, how long it's been since someone made me feel like I wasn't the smartest person in the room? I'm not trying to make you feel anything, Lumi said. I'm just being honest. That's worse, he said, but he was smiling now, a real smile, not the practiced one he used for board meetings and investor dinners. Honesty is a weapon I don't know how to defend against. You're a tech CEO. You know exactly how to defend against honesty. You just don't want to. He tilted his head, studying her the way she'd been studying him. You're good at this. Good at what? This. He gestured vaguely at the space between them, at the city, at the whole unfolding night. Being exactly what someone needs exactly when they need it. It's like you're calibrated for it. The observation hit closer than Lumi expected. She'd never thought of it that way, never articulated it as anything more than a skill she developed, a survival mechanism that had become second nature. But Adrian had named it, and somehow that naming made it feel different. More intentional. More like a choice. Maybe I am, she said carefully. Maybe that's what I'm here for. And what about what you need? He stepped closer, and now they were close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his autumn-colored eyes. Who's calibrated for you? The question landed in her chest like a physical thing, warm and unexpected. She'd been asked a lot of questions in her life, probing questions, skeptical questions, questions designed to catch her off guard. But nobody had ever asked her that. Not like this. Not with eyes that actually wanted to know the answer. She paused, searching for the right words. I hadn't really thought about it. Maybe you should start, Adrian said softly. Maybe you deserve someone who sees you the way you see everyone else. The night air was cold on her cheeks, but she could feel heat rising where he'd touched her, not physically, but the memory of his breath against her ear, the careful way he'd orchestrated their encounter, the vulnerability he'd shown her that he probably showed no one else. You were going to ruin me 3 hours ago, she said, and there was no accusation in her voice. Just wonder. I know. He looked away, and something in his expression shifted, guilt, maybe, or shame. I thought it was the only way. I thought I had to win at any cost. And now? He met her eyes again, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Not calculation. Not strategy. Something rawer, less polished. Now I think winning might have been the wrong goal all along. A car splashed through a puddle nearby, and the sound broke the spell just enough for Lumi to remember where they were, standing on a street corner in the middle of the night, wet and cold and more exposed than she felt comfortable being. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Lumi." He said her name like he was tasting it, trying to figure out what it meant. "I'd like to see you again." "Not as opponents." He stopped, clearly struggling to find the right word. "As people who might understand each other," she finished. "That's what you're trying to say, isn't it?" "Yes," he said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "Yes, exactly that." She considered him for a long moment. The rain had started to fall harder now, turning his white shirt transparent at the shoulders, darkening his hair. He looked less like a CEO than like a man who'd been wandering through the fog for a long time and had finally seen a light he recognized. "There's a jazz bar in North Beach," she said finally. "Black Cat. They stay open until 4, and the saxophonist on Thursdays is almost as good as the one I heard in New Orleans a few years ago." "Thursday," Adrian repeated, and it was less a question than a vow. "I'll be there around midnight." She stepped back, putting distance between them with the deliberate slowness of someone who knew exactly how to create a memorable exit. "If you're interested." "I'm interested," he said, and the words came out rougher than he'd probably intended, charged with something that made Lumi's stomach flip in a way she hadn't expected. "Good," she said, and for the first time that night, she let herself smile without calculation. "Then I'll see you Thursday." "And Adrian?" "Yes?" "Next time you want to get my attention, try having a conversation instead of a conspiracy. It's more effective." She turned and walked away, heels clicking on the wet pavement, and she could feel his eyes on her until she rounded the corner and disappeared into the night. Behind her, Adrian Pierce stood in the rain, tie clip still perfectly straight, and wondered how a woman he tried to destroy 3 hours ago had become the most compelling thing that had happened to him in years. The jazz bar was dark and warm, the kind of place that felt like a secret even when it was crowded. Lumi had picked it deliberately, her sanctuary, her safe harbor, the place she came to when she needed to remember that there were still beautiful things in the world. She'd arrived early, as she always did. Not because she was eager, though she was, despite herself, but because she needed to settle into the space, to claim it as hers before anyone else could. She'd ordered her usual, a Macallan 12, neat, and she'd settled into the corner booth where she could see the door and the stage and the whole room at once. The saxophonist was setting up, a tall black man with silver at his temples and fingers that looked like they'd been born to hold the instrument. He caught her eye and nodded, and she nodded back. They had an understanding, he and Lumi. He played, and she listened, and neither of them needed to say anything else. Adrian appeared at the door at 12:07, slightly out of breath, his hair still damp from the rain. He changed out of his suit into a dark sweater and jeans, and the transformation was startling. Without the armor of professional attire, he looked younger. Softer. More like the man she'd glimpsed through the hotel window than the one who'd tried to blackmail her into submission. 7 minutes late, she said as he slid into the booth across from her. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." "Traffic," he said, and then he laughed, that same surprised sound from the street corner. "No, that's a lie. I changed my shirt 4 times. I was nervous." "You?" Lumi raised an eyebrow. "The man who orchestrated a public smear campaign against me less than 24 hours ago?" "That man is an idiot," Adrian said, and there was something so honest in the way he said it that Lumi couldn't help but smile. "I'm starting to realize that he's been an idiot for a long time. I just didn't know it." The saxophonist began to play, something slow and aching, the kind of music that felt like it was telling a story you'd been waiting your whole life to hear. Lumi felt the familiar pull of it, the way jazz always seemed to find the spaces inside her that she kept hidden from the world. You were right, Adrian said, his voice low enough that she had to lean in to hear him. About the 7th page. About everything. I'd been staring at that mistake for weeks, trying to figure out how to fix it without anyone noticing. And then you noticed. Someone was going to, Lumi said. It was a small error, but the people on the evaluation committee are sharks. They smell blood from miles away. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, and she watched the familiar gesture of anxiety she'd catalogued from her window. I should have handled it differently. I should have asked for help, or delayed the presentation, or not tried to destroy the competition instead of fixing your own work. Lumi's tone was gentle, teasing, but the point landed. Or that. He met her eyes, and the vulnerability there was almost painful to witness. I'm not used to being wrong, Lumi. It's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Most people aren't, she said. But the ones who can admit it are the ones who end up being right about the things that matter. The saxophone swelled around them, filling the space with something that felt almost sacred. Lumi watched Adrian's face relax, watched the tension drain from his shoulders as the music worked its magic. You come here often, he said. This is your place. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. It's the only place in the city where I can think clearly. The music, she paused, searching for the right words, it drowns out the noise. All the other noise. The expectations, the ambitions, the games everyone plays. Here, it's just the music. And me. And now me, Adrian said softly. I hope that's okay. She studied him for a long moment. The way the candlelight caught his features. The way he seemed to be holding his breath, waiting for her answer. Actually, she said, I think it might be more than okay. I think it might be exactly what I needed. The surprise on his face was genuine, almost boyish. Really? Really? She picked up her glass, and he mirrored the gesture. To unexpected things, she said. To the people who show up when you least expect them. To Lumi, he said, and something in the way he said her name made her chest feel tight. The most unexpected thing that's ever happened to me. They clinked glasses, and as the whiskey burned its way down Lumi's throat, she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was what the night had been leading to all along. Not a battle. Not a victory. Just two people in a jazz bar, learning to see each other. The next week was strange. Lumi went to work, navigated the politics of the bid, and found herself checking her phone more often than she'd like to admit. Adrian didn't call or text, but she hadn't expected him to. There was something old-fashioned about the way their connection was unfolding, something that felt almost fragile, like something that needed careful handling. And then the yacht happened. It was a charity gala, the kind of event that Lumi usually navigated with practiced ease. Cruise ships lit up the waterfront, string lights crisscrossed the deck, and everyone who was anyone in San Francisco's tech scene had turned out. She'd come alone, as she often did, and she'd spent the first hour working the room with the effortless charm that had made her reputation. Adrian was there too. She'd spotted him across the deck, deep in conversation with a group of investors, and something in her chest had unclenched at the sight of him. He looked good in his black suit, the formal wear emphasizing the sharp lines of his body, and when he caught her eye from across the room, he smiled, a small, private smile that she felt in her bones. She was just getting a fresh drink at the bar when George Harwood appeared. He was drunk, of course. He was always drunk by hour 2 of any event that involved free alcohol. He was an older man, white-haired and red-faced, the kind of investor who thought his money made him more interesting than he actually was. Well, he said, sloshing his drink as he approached her. If it isn't Lumi Chan. The woman who gets things done. George, Lumi said evenly. Good to see you. How's the portfolio doing? You tell me, he said, and there was something ugly in his voice now, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. I hear you've been getting things done in ways that don't exactly require a law degree, if you know what I mean. The implication was clear. The insult, unmistakable. She could feel the room going quiet around her, could feel eyes turning their way. This was the moment, she knew. The moment that could define her reputation, could undo all the careful work she'd done to be taken seriously. Adrian was moving toward her, she could see him out of the corner of her eye, his face dark with anger. He was going to intervene, to defend her honor, to make a scene that would probably make things worse. She held up one hand, and he stopped. George, she said, and her voice was warm, welcoming, the voice she used when she was about to do her best work. I'm so glad you brought that up. Because I've been meaning to talk to you about your portfolio. Specifically about that little biotech startup you invested in last quarter. George blinked, caught off guard. What about it? I've been doing some research, Lumi said, keeping her voice bright and conversational, and I've found some fascinating things about their clinical trials. Fascinating things that I think you'd find very interesting. The kind of things that might make you reconsider whether that particular investment is going to pay off the way you'd hoped. She leaned in, dropping her voice to a confidential murmur. See, George, I don't need to sleep my way to the top. Because I've already figured out what I need to know. And what I need to know is that you're about to lose a very significant amount of money if you don't make some changes. And I'd be happy to tell you exactly what those changes should be. If you're interested. George's face had gone pale. The slurring confidence had drained out of him, replaced by something that looked a lot like fear. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice cracked on the word. Am I? Lumi smiled, and there was nothing predatory in it, just warmth, just helpfulness. I don't bluff, George. You know that. I read. I research. I understand things that people don't want me to understand. And right now, I understand that you need to be very, very careful about who you pick fights with. Because I might just know enough to help you. Or hurt you. Whichever you'd prefer. The silence stretched between them, and then George laughed, a nervous, almost hysterical sound. Lumi-chan, he said, raising his glass in a gesture of surrender. You're something else entirely. I know, she said, and there was no arrogance in the words. Just facts. Now, George, I really would like to discuss those clinical trials with you. But maybe we should do it somewhere with less of an audience? I have a feeling this conversation might be better for both of us if it stays private. He nodded, and she watched him retreat, watched the crowd's attention shift away from her as the moment passed. She'd done it. She'd turned a potentially career-destroying insult into a business opportunity, and she'd done it without losing her cool or her dignity or her place in the room. And then she turned, and Adrian was right there, and the look on his face made her breath catch. He was staring at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Like she was a puzzle he'd been trying to solve his whole life and had finally, impossibly, found the answer to. Lumi, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. That was, don't, she said, but she was smiling. Don't tell me I'm terrifying. I already know. Terrifying doesn't even begin to cover it. He stepped closer, and she let him close the distance until she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. What I want to tell you is, I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that. You just made a man twice your age and 50 times your investment portfolio surrender without even raising your voice. 50 times my investment portfolio is still a pretty small number, she said, and Adrian laughed, and it was a beautiful sound, full of genuine delight. What I really need to do is find a way to turn his money into something actually useful. George is an idiot, but he's a rich idiot, and I've got plenty of ideas for how he could be investing better. That's what you're thinking about right now, Adrian said, shaking his head in wonder. Not how he insulted you. Not how you just made him look like a fool. Just how to make his money do more good. I'm a PR person, Lumi said. It's what I do. I find the good in things, and then I tell everyone about it. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. And when she didn't, his fingers brushed against her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear. I don't know what to do with you, he said softly. I don't know how to classify you. You're not like anyone I've ever met. That's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me, Lumi said, and she meant it. I meant it as a compliment, Adrian said. I don't know what to do with the feeling. The feeling of wanting to be near you. Of wanting to understand you. You could start by asking me a question, Lumi said. Something real. Something that isn't about business. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face like he was looking for the right question. What's the scariest thing you've ever done? He asked finally. Lumi considered the question. The scariest thing, she said slowly, is probably walking into a room full of people who don't trust me and making them trust me anyway. Because the stakes are always high, and the consequences of failure are always real, and I never know for sure if it's going to work until it does. Does it always work? No, she said. Sometimes it doesn't. But I always learn something when it doesn't. And usually, the next time, I get it right. He was leaning closer now, and she could feel the pull of him, the gravity of his attention, the way his eyes were focused on her with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. Can I tell you something? He said, and his voice was barely audible. Of course. I wanted to ruin you, he said. I wanted to hurt you and your company and everything you'd built. Because I was scared, and because it was easier to destroy you than to admit that I was failing. And then you were so yourself. So completely, unapologetically yourself. And I realized that the woman I was trying to destroy was the most remarkable person I'd ever met. Lumi's heart was pounding in her chest, and she didn't know what to do with the feeling. She'd been practiced in handling so many things, angry investors, jealous colleagues, men who underestimated her. But this genuine, open, vulnerable declaration, this was something else entirely. Adrian, she said, and his name tasted like something new and strange and wonderful on her tongue. We don't have to, I know, he said. I know we don't have to do anything. I just wanted you to know. That's all. Whatever happens next, whatever doesn't happen, I wanted you to know that I see you. The real you. And that I think you're incredible. The boat rocked gently beneath them, and the distant sounds of the party faded away until there was nothing but the two of them, standing in the night, suspended in a moment that felt bigger than either of them. Thank you, Lumi said, and her voice was softer than she'd intended. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you for letting me, he said. I know I don't deserve it. You don't, she agreed, and she was smiling. But maybe we both deserve a second chance. She could have kissed him then. The moment was there, the opportunity, the perfect romantic scene that would have sealed everything. But Lumi had learned something over the years, that some things needed time. That the best connections were the ones that grew slowly, carefully, without forcing anything. So she stepped back, just slightly, and watched the disappointment flicker across his face. Not yet, she said softly. But maybe soon. He nodded, and there was understanding in his eyes. Okay, he said. I can wait. I know you can, Lumi said. That's what makes this worth waiting for. The saxophone started up again, and Lumi felt something settle in her chest. Something that felt like trust, like hope, like the possibility of something real. She looked at Adrian, and he was looking back at her, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt like she'd found exactly what she'd been searching for. The bid went to Aurora Tech. Lumi's company won, and she was at the celebration when her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian, on the roof. One last time. She slipped away from the party and took the elevator to the top, stepping out into the cool night air. The city sprawled below them, a river of light cutting through the darkness, and Adrian was standing at the edge, his back to her. I suppose this is where you tell me you're happy for me, Lumi said softly, and he turned. The lines of his face were drawn with exhaustion, with defeat, with something that looked almost like grief. I am happy for you, he said. He ran his hand through his hair, that anxious gesture she'd come to recognize. The board is discussing my future. They're not happy. I'm sorry, Lumi said, and she meant it. I know what this means to you. Do you? He met her eyes, and there was rawness there, a vulnerability that he'd never shown anyone else. Do you know what it means to lose everything you've worked for? To have your whole life defined by one failure? I don't know, Lumi said. But I know what it means to be afraid of failing. And I know that the fear doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you human. She walked to him, stopping just close enough to touch him. Adrian, I didn't win this bid to destroy you. I won it because I believed in my work. And I really believe, that you're going to be okay. Because you're too smart and too determined and she paused, searching for the right word, too good to let one failure define you. I don't know if I believe that, he said quietly. Then believe me, Lumi said. I'm a professional. I know what I'm talking about. He laughed then, a broken little sound that made her chest ache. You're impossible, he said. I know, she agreed. It's part of my charm. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the city lights flicker below them. And then Adrian said, I wanted to tell you something else. Something I've been thinking about since that night at the jazz bar. What's that? I've never met anyone like you before, he said. Not just because you're brilliant and beautiful and can read people like their books. But because, he paused, struggling for the right words. Because you make me want to be better. You make me want to be the person you think I am. Maybe you are that person, Lumi said gently. Maybe you just didn't know it. And what if I'm not? Adrian's voice was raw, honest in a way that made her heart ache. What if I'm just a guy who made a lot of mistakes and is going to keep making them? Then you'll learn from them, Lumi said. That's what people do. That's what makes them worth knowing. He reached for her then, and she let him take her hand. His fingers were warm against hers, and she felt something shift between them. Something that felt like a beginning. Thank you, he said. For being here. For not giving up on me. I'm not going to give up on you, Lumi said. I told you. I'm calibrated for this. Calibrated for what? Calibrated for finding the good in people, she said. And letting them know that they're worth finding. The week before the industry summit was a blur of preparation. Lumi was presenting on behalf of Aurora Tech, and she'd spent days perfecting her speech, rehearsing her points, making sure every moment was exactly what it needed to be. Adrian was dealing with his own challenges. The board had issued him an ultimatum, and he was going to speak at the same summit, addressing his failure directly and publicly. It was a risk. A huge one. And Lumi had to admit she was terrified for him. You don't have to do this, she said when she met him for coffee at a quiet cafe in the Mission. You could resign. Let the board handle the fallout. I could, Adrian agreed. But that wouldn't be the kind of person you think I am. She looked at him across the small table, at the way his hand trembled slightly as he lifted his cup, and felt something loosen in her chest. You're trying to be better. I'm trying to deserve you, he corrected. There's a difference. The summit was held at Moscone Center, a sprawling convention space that housed thousands of people in comfortable auditorium seating. Lumi's presentation went perfectly. She was polished, professional, everything she needed to be. The applause felt good, the recognition felt earned, and she was making her way through the crowd when Adrian took the stage. She stopped to watch, holding her breath as he approached the podium. He looked confident, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, could see the way he glanced at his notes a few times too many. Thank you for being here, he began, and his voice was steady. I'm going to do something that I've never done before. I'm going to talk about my failures. The room went very quiet. The proposal I submitted for the Aurora Tech bid was flawed, he said. I knew it was flawed. I spent weeks trying to fix it, and I couldn't. And instead of admitting that to my team, instead of asking for help, I tried to destroy my competition instead. He paused, and Lumi could see the effort it took for him to continue. I tried to create a scandal, he said. I tried to ruin a woman who had done nothing to deserve it. And I would have succeeded if she hadn't been smarter than me. If she hadn't seen through my plan and my fear and he took a breath. My cowardice. The silence in the room was absolute. I'm not here to make excuses, Adrian said. I'm here to tell you that I was wrong. And that I'm sorry. And that I'm going to be better. Not because my career depends on it, because my humanity depends on it. Because the person I want to be is the person who admits when they're wrong and tries to do better. A ripple of murmuring went through the crowd. Lumi could see faces, could read the shift in energy. There was respect there. Admiration. The kind of respect that only came from seeing someone be truly honest about their failings. The applause started slowly, and then built, and Adrian looked stunned by it. He stood at the podium, blinking in the spotlight, and Lumi was so proud of him she thought her heart might burst. She was still watching him when a hand touched her arm. Lumi, said a voice she didn't recognize. She turned to find a woman she vaguely knew, a marketing executive from a competing firm, and the look on her face made Lumi's stomach drop. Lumi, the woman repeated, and there was something unpleasantly triumphant in her tone. I have to say, you're very talented. Not just at winning bids, but at winning people. She paused, her smile widening. I suppose that's what happens when you're willing to do anything to get ahead. The implication was clear. The insult, unmistakable. Before Lumi could respond, a voice cut through the murmuring crowd. She doesn't need to do anything to get ahead. She's already there. Adrian was walking toward them, and he looked different. Not like the tense CEO she'd met at the club, not like the vulnerable man on the rooftop. He looked like someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. She doesn't need to use anyone or manipulate anyone, he said, his voice carrying across the room. Because she's brilliant and competent and the most remarkable person I've ever met. He reached Lumi and took her hand, and the room went very, very quiet. I'm the one who's been doing the chasing, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm the one who's been trying to earn her respect. And I haven't earned it yet. But I'm going to keep trying. He turned to face the room, addressing the woman who'd made the snide comment without acknowledging her directly. So if you have something to say about Lumi-chan, you can say it to me. Because she's not just a colleague or an opponent or someone I admire from afar. She's someone I'm trying to deserve. And I'll defend her against anyone who tries to diminish her. The woman's face went red, and she retreated into the crowd. The murmuring around them shifted, curiosity, admiration, judgment, all mixed together. Lumi looked at Adrian, and the tears that had been threatening to spill finally fell. "What you just did," she said, and her voice was shaking. I know it was public," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was just for her. "I know it was maybe too much. But I wanted everyone to know who you are. Who you've always been. And I wanted to prove that I've changed. That I'm worthy of you." "Adrian," she said, and his name was too full of feeling. "You've always been worthy of me. You just didn't know it." The rain had started again by the time they made it outside, falling softly through the streetlights, turning the pavement into a mirror of city lights. They walked in silence to a quiet corner, away from the crowds, and Lumi turned to face him. "You did something incredible today," she said. "You faced your failures. You admitted your mistakes. And you defended me in front of everyone." "I would do it again," he said simply. "I would do it every day if I had to." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, and she felt him lean into her touch. "You know what I told you before?" she asked softly. "About calibrating for people?" "Of course." "I think," she said, and her heart was pounding in her chest, "that maybe I need to calibrate for myself. For what I want. For the person I want to be." "You already are the person you want to be," Adrian said. "You've always been that person." Lumi smiled. "I'm not talking about my career. I'm talking about," she paused, searching for the words. "About what I want. Not just what I'm good at, not just what I can do for other people. What I want." She stepped closer, and the rain was falling on her face, and she didn't care. "I want you, Adrian. I don't think I realized it until this moment, but I do." His eyes widened, and then he was pulling her close, and she was laughing with joy as his lips found hers. The kiss was soft at first, gentle, careful. And then it deepened, and Lumi felt something open inside her, something she'd kept closed for so long. "Lumi," Adrian breathed against her lips. I don't know what I'm supposed to say." "Say you'll be with me," she said. "Say we'll figure this out together. That's all I need." "I'll figure out anything with you," he said. "Anything at all." They stood in the rain, arms wrapped around each other, and Lumi looked at the city around them, the lights, the fog, the familiar landscape she'd navigated for so long. It looked different now. It looked like a place where anything was possible. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "Let's go find a jazz bar. I thought you said it only worked on Thursdays." "There are other bars," she said. "Other saxophonists. Other nights." "I have a feeling," Adrian said, squeezing her hand, "that any night with you is going to be a good one." Lumi smiled, and she felt the truth of it in her bones. She'd spent so long being the person people needed, the one who could read their hidden stories and soothe their hidden fears. And now, here was someone who saw her. The real her. The one who laughed and loved and wanted things for herself. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful, and it was exactly the thing she'd been waiting for. "Let's go," she said. "I know just the place." They walked into the night together, rain falling around them, and Lumi felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be.
Subscribe to me for more content.